Scrolling. Welcome to Conversations with CJ. This is CJ Webster, and I'm very excited for this conversation. I have one of my very good friends that, I'm bringing to the stage today who's going to share some very helpful information that, you never know that when you hear this type of information, who it can help and who it can bless. And his information is very valuable because it could be very timely regarding helping someone when it comes to preventing homelessness. Today I have Logan McDonnell, nonprofit executive and homelessness prevention expert. How you doing, Logan?
Doing well, brother. How you doing?
Hey man, I'm doing fantastic. I'm so happy to get you here, and it's taking some time, but and I appreciate it because it's early where you are. You're in beautiful California. I miss the
Right.
Bay, you know and you've made the Bay your home, man. And you're one of the good guys. I tell people, I say, Logan is one of the people who he sees a problem, on our planet, specifically in the United States, specifically, right now as he's in California, Northern California, and he wants to eradicate that problem. And he's been in this particular, I'm not sure if you call it business or just, initiatives or nonprofits for, several years, and done meaningful work. And, everything that you do, man, I just want to say, I really appreciate the work that you do, whether people tell you that or not, because you are impacting people's lives. You're helping their families. You're helping people, get to work. And you always have these great ideas that you come up with, when it comes to helping prevent people from becoming homeless. So let's start with that. What is homeless prevention?
So first off, you're just too kind, brother. Thank you for all those kind words. Homelessness prevention is the idea that let's stop this before it even happens. There was a study back in 2015 called Home Not Found, where they found that the average cost of an unhoused person when it comes to taxpayer dollars is around $82,000 a year. And 82,000, that's emergency services, that's criminal justice, that's, everybody that doesn't have insurance and just use the emergency room, it all adds up. And the taxpaying citizens really take on the burden of that. So, with inflation around 11%, we're at about 91,000 per unhoused person in the Bay Area. When you actually talk about all the tax dollars that are going to that, homelessness prevention is this idea that with around $5,000 to $6,000, we can actually prevent homelessness from the start. And that's also accompanied with different interventions like housemate matching, legal aid provision, downsizing units, but pretty much given some problem solving attempts when it comes to interventions to say, hey, let's not even let that happen. Let's not even let you fall into homelessness. So that's really what homelessness prevention is.
Wow. That's very interesting. I have to ask you, how did you get into this type of work? I mean, you've been
Right.
doing this for quite some time. And I recall when I found out about the work that you were doing, I invested myself and donated to the organization that you were
Definitely
with at
did.
that time. And that was really important to me because I remember you were breaking it down to me. And you were at that time, it was something with it was with the parking monitors. You had this fantastic idea that you implemented, and you got it going. And I think it was with a company, a nonprofit called Street Teams, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And I'll never forget how passionate you were about what you were doing and how you were helping those people, you know, ultimately get back on their feet with housing. So,
Right.
how did you get started in nonprofit doing this type of work?
Yeah, it's actually kind of circuitous the way I ended up in this position. I was never, I never experienced homelessness, so it wasn't anything that closely related. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it was a mix. It was an amalgamation of different circumstances or experiences that I had that kind of drew me to this. I'll just start by saying, my brother's nonverbal autistic. I remember back in the day, my father, falling behind on his mortgage, and that was a big thing, and we were stressed about that. So there was a lot going on there, but I remember the most significant moment, for me was growing up in New York, the height of stop and frisk. And, stop and frisk, for those that don't know, it isn't just like, it sounds like you're just patting someone down and then, you let them go on their merry way. But
Mhm, mhm,
it comes with a lot more, crap talk. It comes with a lot more getting called out your name. I mean, for me, on a couple of times, it actually came with, the money I had in my pocket not being in my pocket anymore. You
mm,
know,
mhm,
so it's a really ugly experience, especially for a young man. And I remember one day after all that, multiple experiences, I was in front of my house. Cop rolls up, asks me what I'm doing out there. I give him my ID. You could look right behind me and see the ID. The address on the ID matches the address on the house.
mhm.
And he still, detained me for 30 minutes, asking me all types of questions. And it got to the point where it's like, he had call for backup, and we really just now I'm still me arguing with one person, I'm arguing with three people, you know what I'm saying? And what I learned, honestly, is that I shouldn't be arguing with them. But two, I think what I learned was I needed to be able to defend myself in a more practical, sensible way. And I had the chance to do that once I actually did get arrested and I did spend a night in jail. And I took it to trial. They gave me a court date. I took it to trial.
Mhm,
And when I was in trial, I had a book with me called How to Defend Yourself in Court.
mhm.
And I pretty much cross-examined the police officer. And I was able to prove the cop was lying because I think the last question that I asked was, what made you want to tase me? Because he pulled the taser out on me. He didn't
Oh,
use it.
wow.
He pulled the taser out. And he started shining a little infrared laser in my eye. When you have a little laser, it's like a little dot moving around.
Mhm,
And I remember the other cops like, tase him, tase that. I was just like,
mhm.
man, God. They didn't tase me, but they did lock me up for the night. And I asked him what made him want to tase me. And he said, well, you were resisting arrest. You were resisting. And the judge interrupted. And the judge said, wait, he's not charged with resisting arrest. And I remember, like, at that point, like, the judge ruled in my favor. The cop punched the wall, storms out. The
Mhm.
bailiffs are asking me how I did it. It was crazy. But what I learned in that kind of full circle moment was like, dang, my mom was telling me not to. My mom was telling me just pay the fine. She
Mhm.
didn't want me to go in there and do all that I was doing. And I was like, dang, how often does this happen? How often does this kind of add to your long resume when it comes to the criminal justice system? And eventually you have this list of things that you just said that you did or you just succumbed to. And long story short, I knew I wanted to be an advocate in general from that moment on. I just knew I wanted to advocate for
Mm,
people that might not have had the voice, either
mm,
the courage or the articulation, whatever it is,
mhm.
or the support, whatever it is. I just knew one day I want to be an advocate of some sort. And I think at some point I just found myself working in homelessness.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. It gives me chills every time you tell it. And I really appreciate it. Let me ask you this. So what age were you at that time? How old were you at that time? I mean, you had the idea to say, I'm going to be a pro se. I'm going to represent myself, right?
Right.
And I mean, how old were you? And what created, I know what the situation that created that decision, but, or actually you to take that action, but what made you say, you know what, I'm going to take this book and, how to defend yourself in court.
Mhm.
And I'm going to fight this. And I don't need I'm going to do this myself because some people would think Logan probably could have been an attorney at that point. Like that could have been a tipping point where you can go
Right.
into law, right? But I love the fact that you said that you took this situation to say, hey, you know what? I want to advocate for people who can't, advocate for themselves, and I want to be a champion for people who may not have the words or know the different rules that are in place where I can help them. How old were you when this situation happened?
I had to be around 20, 21.
Okay.
Um, and it's funny, all I'd seen, at least in TVs and movies, was, objection, Your Honor, objection. So
Mhm.
really, that's the first part I was just looking for in the book is like, what can I object to? What can I object? I'm just looking for something to object to, like objection, like even though I didn't object to anything, but that was the only thing I knew about court. But really, I'll tell you what made me do it.
Mhm.
I because it was a fine and not a misdemeanor, they don't give you a public defender.
Mm.
And when I went to go try to talk to a lawyer, they were like, "Oh, well, what was it? I think it was like 500 to 1,000." He'd say 500 to 1,000 to go in there and
Mhm.
defend you. And I was like, 500 to 1,000? The fine is 250. I can't even pay that.
Uh-huh.
So for me, I think it was just a good fiscal decision. I didn't have I didn't have a choice. I was like, the book's $10, man. Let me just read this book and maybe
Uh-huh.
that'll be enough.
Wow. I I would like to think that you probably reached out to the author and said, "Hey, you wrote a great book."
I should. I should. It's not too late. Maybe I will. Maybe I will.
So let me go back to homeless prevention, and so you find yourself you're advocating for the homeless. Um, what are some of the things that you learned early in your career that was not things that you that opened your eyes to what homelessness is about, and they may have debunked some myths that you had prior to moving into this particular nonprofit world.
Yeah. Well, I think my first my first real in-depth interaction in homelessness was called the Jungle of San Jose.
Mm,
It was about 67 acres and maybe about 300 people lived there. There was underground burrows where you see, kids run down, and every time Child Protective Services come in, they just hide in the burrows.
wow.
Tree houses. I saw people with, serious degree burns all over their body. And I remember just being like, what happened? It's like they would burn each other's tents at times, like if they had beef or something. And I remember I had never seen anything like that, not even National Geographic. Like I was just like, yo, this is
And it's in San
insane.
Jose. This is next to
This is
Silicon
insane.
Valley.
Right. Right in the middle of the most wealthiest kind of
Right.
like geographic territory, maybe on the planet, right? So I'm sitting here
Mhm.
like, and what's crazy is I went down there, every day for 6 months straight. And during that time, I actually started to really get to know people, and that shock value went away. It's like all those insane images that, I was first introduced to, all of a sudden it's like, wow, I started getting to know people that honestly weren't too different from me. Some of these folks were, I mean, these are folks that had families, these are folks that had careers, these are folks that had, tragedy. There were so many relatable instances. Even the people that when I first met them, I thought they were just kind of like talking in circles and not making sense and schizophrenic or whatever. Like I started listening to them, I was like, oh nah, I know exactly what they're talking about. And I get I get what they're saying, and I know who they're talking about when they say that.
Mhm.
um it was probably the most I don't know. I mean, it was a journey. Let me say that. It was a journey to kind of change my mindset, and it wasn't because of intention. It was just kind of organic, osmotic. I really just got to know these people as people. And it's funny, like the job I had before that was at Hertz. I was trying to
Mhm.
talk people into getting insurance and stuff like that. And the one thing that they put so much emphasis on was know the difference between a hard no and a soft no. Like know the difference between a hard no and a soft no. And that is probably the training that I took with me all through every little bit of work that I did in terms of the homelessness sector, right? Because what I was able to do is my job was to pretty much talk landlords into accepting a subsidy because I went through a Section 8 wait list, 100 different buildings and offices, and
Mhm.
there were no openings except for one. And maybe they had like a 6 month wait list. Everything else, there was no openings. And it occurred to me really quickly, okay, Section 8 wait list isn't the way to go. The best thing for me to do is to actually talk to property managers that say right on their website that they don't take subsidy. And maybe my best bet is to convince them to try to accept this subsidy that we have. And I remember I went through like maybe 10 landlords of getting the door shut in my face.
Mhm.
And maybe I met one woman and she was just like, you know, I don't think the owner would really want to do this. I'm so sorry. And for me, it goes back to that Hertz training of like, oh, that's a soft no. And I
Mhm.
went right back the next day with some donuts and pastries and like introduced her to somebody. And, from that point on, she gave us a shot and she just, she was like, do you have any more people? Do you have more people? Do you have more people?
Mhm.
And that was kind of what I learned about not just determination,
Mhm.
but, tactic and persuasiveness and really, that's the same logic I use when I went on to being a fundraiser. I became the development director, and I'd use that same approach of relationship building and soft nose versus hard nose. And
Mhm.
even now, it's not just external; it's also how we kind of navigate internally in organizations. It's how you break down silos. It's how you kind of how do you persuade other directors or other people that are on your level or whatever? It's like it's you can't do anything by yourself. So
Mhm.
for me, I really had to learn, how do you persuade, how do you navigate some of these conversations, and how do you negotiate?
Wow. That's wow. I mean, there's so much there, just even from the beginning. And it's some, you said you were able to just meet people where as they are people. Actually, I had that written down as you were talking about that. I put respect, I put human empathy, and you saw the humanity within the people that were impacted by being homeless at the time. You look beyond their colors, you look beyond their ethnicity, their education, their current situation, their current state, and you saw through that, and you were able to truly engage with them on a human level. And I think that's amazing. But not only that, you took your business acumen that you learned from being at Hertz, so that as you were, going to meet with different, people that were, the different folks that have the different housing, and you were having those conversations with them. I mean, I love it. You're like, hey, determination, tactic, being persuasive, right? Using donuts, having them meet people. I mean, it served you well. You have over close to 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. I mean, you want to talk
Right,
about
right, right.
6 degrees of separation. I think you probably could get connected to anybody on this planet in probably outer space if you wanted to. just with the use of hard no versus soft no, skill set that you develop. But then also it goes to show that this is real work. This is work that you have to be 100% brought into, passionate about, and committed to, because you could have easily just escaped. You said I went there 6 months every single day. You were meeting people, you were meeting families, you were talking to people. You had an open ear, which is amazing. And you're like, hey, and I'm next door to one of the most wealthiest places on the planet, but this is a problem that we need to deal with, and someone has to deal with it. And you're like, it's going to start with me, and I'm going to make sure that this is my mission to help them. So kudos to you for that. Let me ask you this: have you found that in the work that you do, how do people get equity in their treatment? Some people, when you think about it, some people may see certain folks and they'll say, well, this person is homeless, but they have a PhD. And people don't think that people with PhDs or different levels of education are not homeless. Like, no, homelessness can impact so many different people. It's a broad range. And you specifically see that in places like California, right?
Mm, mhm.
You could be a top musician with, with a previous experience of a platinum record or something like that. Like I think about a guy that Santana helped, and that touched my heart. And thank goodness the guy in Santana's band had Santana that actually went back and reached out to him and helped him get back on his feet. I don't know if you're familiar with that story,
Mm.
but that was a story that touched my heart when I was living in the Bay Area. Um, but it's huge. It's a huge range. It's not that you're not smart. It's not that you're not educated. It's not that you didn't have a well-paying job. It could be any type of situations that can happen to people in life and that result in them being homeless. Have you seen it where, that people need help, and how do we get to a place where, regardless of their status, education, ethnicity, gender, that they want to be treated equal and with equity? How have you seen that happen in, homeless prevention with case managers working through so many different, cases and things of that nature?
Man, that's a really good question. I think I'll start here. I'll say that for me, equity is compassion, right? You actually just got me thinking about a random story. I'll just tell
Mhm.
you real quick. Fundraising. You do a whole bunch of research and you find someone that has the capacity, might have some linkage to an organization, might have some interest in a certain cause. And we had found this, you know, billionaire at a tech company. And I remember, we Bombas is a sock company and they donate socks.
Mhm.
And part of the tactic was like, what if we actually send one of these pairs of socks to this group of billionaires and centimillionaires, and we just say, hey, give this pair of socks to the next person you see on the street. And for me, there's been times socks is again one of the most coveted items when someone doesn't have anything. You don't know how much you like socks until you don't have any socks, right?
Mm, mhm,
And we sent this pair of socks to someone, and all we wanted was just to give someone who has an immense amount of wealth the opportunity to engage with someone who experiences homelessness and have a positive interaction. And not just a positive interaction, but an interaction that gets to the core of human connection.
mhm,
And if you could just in your space as a billionaire just engage with this person over a positive thing like socks that's so small, trivial, something we don't even think twice about, what
mhm.
can happen? And I'll tell you this, a few weeks later, we get a $100,000 check from him.
Wow.
And he from that point on, he gave us $20,000 a month, 240,000 a year.
Mm,
And even though I never spoke to him, I have a really good hunch it's because we sent him that pair of socks, right?
mhm, mhm,
So that's the idea is really when we're talking about equity, we're talking about empathy.
mhm,
And one of the core components of empathy is and or equity is understanding,
mhm,
right? So we utilize that understanding when we're talking about homelessness prevention as a whole. Because I'll tell you right now, if you look at the years 2000 to 2017, Oakland lost 30% of its black population.
mhm,
If you go back to the 90s, it lost 40% of its black population. I'll also tell you that if you look at San Jose, San Francisco, or Oakland, and you look at the black population versus the percentage of black people who are unhoused, right? And you could look at it's called a point in time count, a pit count.
mhm, mhm,
So if you just look at basic demographic information versus the demographic information when it comes to homelessness, you'll see there's this large overrepresentation when it comes to how many of us make up. It's like you'll see we'll be 3% of a population and make up
mm,
30% of the homelessness. And that's super sad to me. And it's also what we target, right?
mhm,
So we say, okay, obviously we know that there are certain groups that are disproportionately impacted more than others. Now we can't target based on race, right? But what we can do is we know that there were racist housing covenants, right? Where they said if you're black, you can't own this house. I once lived in a house that it had the deed on it, that said if you're black or Asian, you cannot ever buy this house. You know,
wow.
we know that there's these racist covenants, right? We know that there was redlining. We know that there was segregation. So we know all these things. And based on that, we could also say, you know what? Let's target certain zip codes. Let's target the most distressed zip codes and prioritize those distressed zip codes and make sure that anybody that was who has a longevity of being racially targeted, um, racially, and I'm talking about like the food deserts,
Hmm.
the statistics when it comes to education, health, crime, anything. We're gonna go those distressed neighborhoods and we're gonna prioritize them. If you live in this zip code, it you know that and that zip code is like that because of redlining and all these things that all the aforementioned things that we discussed. We're gonna, you know what, you're prioritized over everybody else because we know historically how long you've been excluded and how long you've actually been marginalized based on systems, and that's why you're getting prioritized. We also prioritize, disabling conditions, past experiences of homelessness, and all of these things that pretty much telegraph someone's vulnerability level and how likely they are to succumb to homelessness. Um, I'm not really sure why uh, someone who's been homeless um, is more likely to become homeless again. But I can tell you that when you actually do become homeless, you lose hope, you fall into a system, and a lot of those inequities are perpetuated against you again and again and again and again. So really, when I think of homelessness as a whole, I look at it like Grand Central Station. You
Hmm.
know, 20 trains all going to the same place. You
Hmm.
don't know if that train's, from the foster care system. You don't know if that train's from the criminal justice system. You don't know if that train's from the school to prison pipeline system. You don't know where these trains are coming from, but you know it's all going to Grand Central. Um, and I think it's easy to kind of just say mental health and drugs, right? But you know, those are just stops along the way,
Hmm.
right? And those are things that are actually, in most cases, perpetuated by homelessness. And they're actually a byproduct as opposed to a root cause. So that's kind of my thought
Wow.
process behind it.
You wrote an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, titled "The Pitfalls of Personal Judgment," and you talk about prioritization tools are needed to address systemic bias in financial assistance programs. Um, can you talk about more about that piece that you wrote and the message that you wanted to get across in that particular article?
So when I wrote that article, I was really perplexed at the idea that we have so many different financial assistance programs in the country, and yet about 75% of them really didn't have a prioritization model. Um, and when I think about that, right, I think the other side of that is it's first come, first served, right? It's like whoever hears about this first and applies first gets it first. Um, that doesn't take into consideration the digital equity gap. People that don't have computers at home.
Mhm.
A lot of the people that need this assistance the most and are most likely going to succumb to homelessness, a lot of those folks, by the time they even try to get in, you know, the funds are already exhausted. It's like what we saw with some of the PPP loans, these big corporations getting bailed out while the mom and pop suffer and they don't have any assistance. Because a lot of these, let's just call it what it is, black, brown, small businesses, a lot of them might not have had the resources or the connections or the know-how or even experience with applications like this. So really, when I think about equity, I think about access. I think about what are we doing to penetrate those demographics, and make sure that those folks actually are aware of the assistance that could be offered, and B, are prioritized based on the likelihood that they're actually going to fall into homelessness without this assistance.
Mhm.
Um, and anything that isn't thinking that way is a travesty, and it just, I think, lines the pockets of the people that might not need it as much, honestly. So that's what was going through my head when I wrote the article.
Nice. You talked about eligibility requirements and prioritization platforms in the article. As a way of like helping, with case management,
Hmm.
things of that nature. Just because you're in, California, you're at the hub of technology. I have to ask this question:
Mm,
where do you see AI? Because everyone's talking about AI. Where
right.
does AI play in, in your mind when you think about homelessness prevention and the tools that case managers use to help prevent homelessness? Where does AI play in helping them do more to help more people and prevent them from becoming homeless?
Wow. I feel like artificial intelligence can fine tune everything that I just described, you know.
Mhm.
I think that we could get smarter about how we preemptively know that someone is likely to become homeless. I think in Los Angeles they're already playing around with that, and they already have ways to say like, okay, this person, based on all of these, this data that we have, is likely to become unhoused in the next, X amount of years, right? Um, and the more we're able to actually kind of pinpoint that and target that, the more we're actually able to stop it. So I think it's no different from, you know, when we take our car to the shop and they say, hey, it looks like you're gonna need a new water pump in a couple of months. It's like that's where we need to get with AI. And also, even when we're dealing with people or working with people, um, what can AI tell someone, even as like a chat bot, right?
Mhm.
What would they be able to tell them in terms of here are the resources that are available for you? Here's some other interventions you could try on your own. Here's some other, and it's like, and when I look at it that way, I just think about efficiency, and I just think about really just again stopping it before it happens in the first place.
Mhm. That's awesome. You talked about your father early on when we first started talking. And I believe he's an artist. Is that right?
Right, right, right,
So he was working on some of the you know artwork before it became like major films. Like these are major films now, in the
right.
world. When we think about like the DC Marvel stuff, right? And
Hmm.
I want to say that I think he worked or he helped create some of the artwork for one of the issues of the Black Panther. Am I right?
He didn't do Black Panther,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
but he did. Basically, he's most known for, and this is back, I think in the late '80s, early '90s
Mhm,
when comics were, really up there. But
mhm.
he's really known for his work on Suicide Squad,
Okay.
The Phantom,
Okay.
um, and Iron Man. Iron Man.
Wow.
He's actually, you'll see his name in the credits of um, Suicide Squad. I want to say the
Oh,
second
so like
one.
some of the present movies that they created.
Yeah, you'll see his name in the
Wow.
credits of Suicide Squad for sure. Luke McDonnell. You'll see his name in the credits.
That sounds
And
like
then
that could be a character of Luke. No. That
right,
sounds
right,
like
right,
that could be a character there,
right, right, right.
Strong
Actually,
man, Luke.
yeah, right, 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 right. And he actually created or co-created rather the enemy from the first Iron Man movie,
Wow.
the Ironmonger.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
his name is Obadiah Stane. But
Okay.
yeah, anyway, that's the enemy from the first Iron Man movie, and my dad co-created him.
So I have to ask you, who was your favorite superhero growing up?
Um, man, you know who I really liked, man? Lobo.
Who
I
was
like
Logan?
Lobo. I know, I know, I know, I know. I was thinking, before they started doing all those like oh, what are those movies? Like all those like Superman and Batman movies.
Hmm.
I was always thinking, I was like, when I first saw 300,
Hmm.
and then the Spirit came out, I was like, yo, if they did a Lobo movie in that style, before the style got played out a little bit, but in that style, I was like, man, that'd be crazy. But Lobo, he was like a bounty hunter,
Okay.
um, that he be out of space. He'll go to hell, he'll go to heaven. He'll go to hell and kill the devil, and then go to heaven and then beat up the angels. Like he was just wilding. So it was like every time you thought it couldn't get worse, it just got worse. You know what I'm saying? But I think he was DC's answer to Wolverine, and
Wow.
they probably actually designed him as like a joke originally, from what I understand. And then after that,
Uh-huh.
it got so popular, it was like, oh nah, we gotta keep this going. So I rock with Lobo.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think outside of that, definitely the Punisher.
Mm.
Actually, my pops, and you could look up this one too. He did you remember you see on Disney Plus they got the What If
Yes.
show.
Yes.
So that was a comic, the What If comics. It was a series, and he did the one. It was what if the Punisher
Mhm.
got possessed by Venom? No, yeah, got possessed by Venom. So
Oh.
he got the Punisher skull, but with the
Uh-huh.
Venom legs out of it. Like I was just like, oh, this is crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
So but yeah, he did that comic, and I thought that was probably the most fire kind
yeah,
of cover that I remember him doing.
yeah. It's interesting that you talk about Lobo, and thank you for sharing that, because you talked about, he's like, hey, he will go anywhere. He will go to heaven, he'll go to hell, but he would engage. And when I think about some of the stories that you talked about, I mean, some would say that you went into hell when you were in San Jose, and you went there every single day for 60 days, but you found heaven in that you found humanity and
Mm.
you found
Oh
people,
wow,
right? You know what I mean? Like
I like that.
you
Yeah,
and you were able to go in every single day and really create a better place for people, to live, and that inspired you, as continue to fight, no matter where it is, whether you're fighting in hell or whether you're fighting in heaven, or as one of our famous folks would say, if you're fighting on ice, right? You
Mm.
you will go where the need is greatest, and to do the best work that you can. So I really, really appreciate your time today. And my last question is, where can people, find you, but also how can they help? How can they help in the fight to prevent homelessness?
All right. Well, you can find me Logan McDonnell on LinkedIn. The last name's McDonnell. So you can find me Logan McDonnell on LinkedIn, and you could also find me on Instagram, Logan MCD 86. Um, and I think that everybody could help by getting involved, volunteering at whatever local agencies you can. If you have some a dollar in your pocket and you can afford to give it away, give it away. And most of all, just have an empathetic eye. um I think it's easy to look at one person and judge them, or even worse, look at one person and judge a whole demographic of people. um but really, all we want at the end of the day is love, safety, and you know maybe something in our stomachs every now and then. So I think that in general, just be empathetic, and just think about that in every walk of life that you have, in your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Logan, man. It was great. I'll have to bring you back on, because we just scraped the surface, and there's so much more to talk about. Really appreciate everything that you're doing, and really appreciate all the hard work and effort and dedication with the nonprofit. And so, thank you so much for your time. And thanks, guys, for listening.
Thank you, brother.
Stop scrolling.